Welcome to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. This is indeed my show. Let me get my touch straight. Looks a little bit off. I'm glad that you guys can join me this morning. I'm sorry, I was having a conversation with my guest. There was a bit of a miscommunication in regards to the time frame, and the miscommunication was my fault. But he's going to join nevertheless. We have Tim Anderson that's going to join first thing this morning. In fact, he's going to be joining now. To be more straightforward. The big news story, obviously, is what has to be one of the dumbest, shamelessly transparent, or let's say stupidly transparent episodes that I've ever seen come out of a White House. And you can imagine that's pretty steep company, but it is rather astonishing, to put it mildly. Donald Trump has called for a full blockade of Venezuela, which is, if you don't know, is an act of war. Full stop. What's wild about this is I had the conversation with Warwick yesterday when we discussed this. And good, Tim is here. All right. So I'm going to go to my guests because it's very late where he is. Tim, again, you have my apologies. I swear I misunderstood when I read that, when I read the notification. But thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate you joining me. Tim Anderson, he's a writer, internationalist, academic director of the Center for Counter-Hegemonic and Counter-Hegemonic Studies. Tim, once again, thank you for joining me. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about, I would say, the big news story of the day, and that's Donald Trump effectively declaring what, for all intents and purposes, is an act of war
Yes.
against Venezuela, and calling for this overwhelming naval blockade of Venezuela.
Yes, it is an act of war. A naval blockade is an act of war. There's no doubt about that. But I
Yeah,
don't think he's prepared for war. I don't think he's ready for war. And despite the warships, there's no capacity the US military has to mount a ground invasion. They're not in a position to do that at the moment. They could bomb people. They could send in missiles. They could send in mercenaries. That's what Trump's used in the past. I think it's a huge bluff, actually, and I think he's going to try and intimidate. He's trying to intimidate, and then he's going to try and claim that he's made some sort of deal. That's his modus operandi, isn't it? Threaten, bully, and then try and claim that there's some sort of deal going on under the sort of bullying pressure that he's got. I suspect that's what's going on. Of course, doesn't mean they can't kill more civilians. They've already killed, a few dozen fishermen in boats, the most inoffensive people, basically. And now that just today, apparently there was an aircraft, a civil aircraft from one of the Caribbean islands that came close to a collision with one of the US Air Force refueling planes, something like that. So he's creating a lot of chaos in the region, I suspect he's trying to mount intimidation. The US forces, as I say, they're not in a position to mount a ground invasion. It's far too difficult in the Venezuelan terrain. And given that it's not just the Venezuelan armed forces, there are several million civilians under arms. And remember, it was civilians under arms that stopped the attempted coup 5 years ago in Venezuela, when a very weak, pathetic attempt by Trump back in 2020, which was foiled by civilian militia back at that time, and just a handful of them. Well, they've got a lot more who've been given warning and are fully mobilized at the moment. But it's very dangerous what he's doing. I really don't think that he wants to follow through with having the US military engaged in some ground war there. It's going to be a disaster for both sides, of course, but there's no chance that the US military can really mount an effective ground invasion where they are at the moment.
well, and just so the audience will see this, just so they, in case they haven't necessarily seen the tweet, it is nothing more ridiculous than putting this as a tweet. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. Like, just stopping right there for the moment. The largest armada in South America for Venezuela, of all places. It would only get bigger, and the shock to them will be like nothing they've ever seen before until such time as they return the United States of America's oil, land, and other assets that they previously stole from us. What is he talking about? What is he talking about? What land? What oil? What assets has Venezuela stolen from the United States? Britain has stolen Venezuelan gold. Um, like, this is outrageous. Like, this is so over the top.
It's it's the world up, the upside down world, as the writer Eduardo Galeano said it, the upside down world, because of course the US under Trump, and using the fake president, the previous one, what was his name, Guaido,
Mhm.
stole Citgo, which was a huge branch of the Venezuelan PDVSA that was providing cheap heating fuel to poor families in the US for many years, set up by Hugo Chavez, a very important initiative. And when the Trump administration, the first Trump administration, decided it wasn't going to recognize the elected Venezuelan government under Nicolas Maduro, they then tried to seize all of the foreign assets, including the British seizing gold that was held by the Bank of England there, and the US, with their collaborators, of course, getting a commission. We now know that some of those extremist opposition figures like Leopoldo Lopez were getting multi-million-dollar commission for trying to put some veil of legitimacy over the US stealing Citgo, this huge network in the US, which was selling fuel, but also providing subsidized fuel to poor families in the US, So that was the theft. I think from the Trump's perspective, it's really the only way you can make sense of it is that the US thought that they owned Venezuela, that they owned South America for a century, basically. That it was their backyard, or as Biden said, their front yard. And I think actually the oil of Venezuela fueled US military through a couple of world wars in the 20th century. So they effectively did own it in many respects, to the extent that the PDVSA was privatized into US companies. And of course, that's what the current Nobel Peace Prize winner, Maria Corina Machado, who wants an invasion of her own country as a proof of what a great peacenik she is, has said openly that she's going to launch a fire sale of all of the assets, all of the energy assets and other assets of Venezuela for the oligarchy linked to Trump, basically. So Trump imagines that he owns this already in some sort of way, if he can carry off some sort of regime change operation. But really, it's a very disturbed sort of logic that he's talking about. It doesn't amount to much, except for someone who is really very self-obsessed, narcissistic, and think that he owns the world. He's a dictator of the world, or the king of the world, and he can do and say whatever he likes, basically. And simply by saying it, he expects things may come true there. It defies any sort of real logic.
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point. I mean, the U.S. has military assets in this region for what, 2 months now, if not mistaken, and they have effectively decided that their main task will be to murder Venezuelan fishermen. The thing that they're getting a lot of heat about is the boat that they double tapped on September 2nd, which wasn't even headed in the direction of the United States. Nobody was calling for backup or for help. The people were literally waving, trying to get help in the water for apparently 40 minutes or more than 40 minutes before the U.S. effectively murdered them in cold blood. And all of these people were murdered in cold blood. After all, this was the U.S. military that was effectively doing this. And so the question that a lot of people ask, even on this channel, why haven't they done it yet? Meaning, if indeed this was going to be some kind of invasion, why haven't they invaded yet? And we got cues from this, believe it or not, from, what is the name, Susie Wiles, that kind of insinuated that what Trump wanted to do was effectively stay out and murder boats and whatnot that is in the surrounding region. But apparently seems to know better of it than to invade. So I don't know. It's outrageous. And I am very curious on what Russia, China, Iran, many of these other countries that may have boats going to Venezuela, what they are going to do if indeed this quote unquote largest blockade in the history of South America it's going to come to fruition.
I'm not
Because
even sure if that's true. Remember, the British had that war with Argentina in the Falklands or the Malvinas back in the 80s. So
yes,
anyway, whatever. Trump likes to use superlatives, so that's just his style, basically. But look, I think you're right that if it was really going to be an invasion, they would have mobilized far more troops than they have at the moment. At the moment, they've got some firepower and planes, of course. Of course, the other side to that is that, there are various reports, so I don't know to what extent they're true, that some of Venezuela's assets have been helping them with ship-to-ship missiles and with air defense to some extent. And of course, when you mention Russia and China, it's true that certainly China and I think Russia also have some serious investments in the Orinoco Basin, basically. So there is some sort of incentive there for them to protect their investments. I mean, under Biden, the US had were pumping some oil out of the Orinoco Basin too. There was a deal struck under the Biden administration with Nicolas Maduro in Mexico. There was some prisoner exchange that went on. Some of those mercenaries that had invaded Venezuela were a swap for, I think, some of the Venezuelan refugees who were deported to those huge prisons in El Salvador, basically. So Nicolas Maduro managed to rescue some Venezuelan citizens from that hellhole that Trump had sent them to, basically, and in exchange sent some of the mercenaries that were used for the invasion and an attempt to assassinate Maduro and mount some sort of coup, a very badly organized coup attempt back in
yes.
it was early 2020, basically. So you're right in suspecting that this is some sort of front going on at the moment. And as I said, I believe it's really Trump trying to threaten and intimidate and create the conditions for some sort of concessions. And apparently there's been some talk between Maduro and Trump already. I think it was misreported by the New York Times. You wouldn't really want to rely on what the New York Times said about it, but certainly I think that Venezuela is open to some sort of concessions in the extent that it would be better to have some US companies in the Orinoco Basin sharing some of that oil wealth as a type of protection, a security for averting what Trump is threatening to do at the moment. And of course, the naval blockade immediately raises the prospect of some imminent confrontation, basically, because Venezuela is not going to tolerate it. Already you've seen some near clash with a plane from Curacao with the US Air Force there. So that's raised the stakes in terms of a possible accident, basically. And I don't know how much worse it's going to get before Trump is going to try and claim that he's organized some sort of deal. Certainly he's spoken to Maduro. We don't know exactly what they said. The US administration is going to spin it the way they want to spin it, of course. So I don't think anything coming out of Washington is going to be very reliable now. And maybe they're looking for some sort of compensation, because the other day Marco Rubio effectively conceded defeat in Ukraine. So that war has failed, and they're admitting that it's failed, basically. And Russia's going to get everything it wants in southeast Ukraine, at least in the Donbass and Crimea, at some stage, once the Ukrainians have elected some new leader, because the current one has run out his mandate, basically. So maybe Trump is hoping he's going to get some sort of compensation for the failure in Ukraine, although he said it was Biden's war, but really it became Trump's war because he didn't, contrary to his claims, bring about a peace deal very quickly. It stretched on. He's funded more disaster in Ukraine, more of the destruction of Ukrainian youth through this terrible war of attrition, basically. And now they've admitted that they've lost there, so it's going to be Trump's Afghanistan. So how is he going to compensate for that? He's looking for some way out, I believe.
Well, the reporting that was coming out of Western papers was that Marco Rubio was effectively running the ball on this, that Maduro offered Trump pretty much everything, and that the decision by the White House was that, well, we don't want what he's offering. We want him to leave. And it's better that we have U.S. assets on the ground because we're able to effectively control the country as a whole. Meaning we don't like the fact that Russia, China, Iran, and that these other countries are effectively the relationships that they have with South America. And that this is, I guess, a gateway into South America, not to mention with resources that Venezuela has at their disposal. At least that was the reporting. And so it's like, I don't even know what they're negotiating at that point. If the reporting is right, the man offers you everything and you tell him no. What else is
Well,
there to
they
discuss?
may not like it. Trump may not like it, but it doesn't mean to say that. I think the reports are exaggerated of Maduro offering them everything. Basically, he's not offering them
Yes.
everything because they want, like they with Iran, they want a complete surrender. They really do want everything, basically. Like the Israelis in Palestine and in the whole of West Asia, they want everything. There's no limit to it, so there's no question of negotiation there. But of course, they're not going to get away with it. They're not going to get everything. Trump, I'm pretty sure Nicolas Maduro has not offered them all the things that they were demanding, just as the Iranians are not going to offer them all the things that they're demanding.
Right.
But something, yes, that's possible.
Let's move to Bondi Beach. You live in Australia. The time zone there is wicked, and Jesus, I am sorry that this time zone is as bad as it is. You sent me information. Oh, okay, let me start at the beginning. I am not of mind that this is a false flag because, from my point of view, it doesn't need to be a false flag. But you sent me information that kind of insinuates that there is some evidence around this idea that it is a false flag. And just so the people would know, up from my latest read of this, 15 people were killed. I think it was more than 20 injured.
Yes.
This was some kind of Hanukkah celebration. It was a father and son team. The father was an immigrant. The son was born in Australia. They had a very experienced, at the very least, a seemingly very experienced manner in which they went about the executions or the killings. And they were disarmed by a Muslim. What is it? Ahmed El Ahmed, I believe his name is.
A Syrian man, yeah.
Yeah, who was shot twice in the process of sitting in the hospital as we speak, from nearly being killed from disarming the other two people who were involved.
Well, he disarmed one of them, but he didn't shoot them because the gun had run out of ammunition at that time, and that was the father. And the father went back to the son and continued to shoot, basically. So that man disarmed the father temporarily, but then himself got shot in the process. The son shot him from a distance, basically from a bridge where they were hiding. But look, these two were have known links to Wahhabi groups, Wahhabi Salafi groups. The son was studying Quran recital with them. Apparently, they visited the Philippines, and a Wahhabi, that is to say, a Saudi-backed sectarian form of Islam. Really, it's a type of terrorism in West Asia that's been aligned almost exclusively to the US and to its allies, in particular the Israelis. In other words, the Israelis have worked with Wahhabis in the past. That's what makes this so suspicious. The Wahhabi strain of Islam, and a lot of people don't really understand this because of the propaganda wars, it has never attacked the Israelis, never, not once. Now, there are quite a lot of Israelis in Bondi, actually. The group that organized this is not just some standard Jewish group in Bondi. It was an extreme right-wing group with links to Itamar Ben-Gvir in Israel. And one of the rabbis that was killed is one of those rabbis who was demanding the destruction of every man, woman, and child in Gaza. So there are some pretty ugly people in that group. And there was a head of a major Zionist group who was slightly wounded, but put up pictures of himself with blood all over his face. So we don't really know to what extent that was staged. What I'm saying is there is some reason to suspect that it could have been a false flag, but it's not conclusive so far. Some of the things that were put up, there's no basis for. Like, for example, there were some claims that the son was working in the IDF in Israel. That's not true. I've seen no basis for that. And also there's some claims that there was some Israeli searches for this man's name, the son, before the event. I haven't been able to replicate that on Google Trends. So some of the claims are definitely cause for suspicion, but nothing's conclusive yet. What is clear is it was this Jewish celebration that was targeted, but what the aim of that was and who was behind it is not clear. These two shooters, I think there's more to it than just these two people who were shooting at the crowd there. The father is dead. The son was seriously wounded. He was in hospital. He's now in detention. Basically, presumably he's going to be charged. But we don't know what's behind it. We do know that the Israelis are desperate to try and link Iran or Hezbollah to it. Yes. And of course, there's very good reasons why that can't be the case, because the people of Wahhabi terrorists most hate is Iranians and Shia Muslims, basically. And you see that from the former ISIS commander, who's now the de facto president of Syria. He has designated some of his groups, the foreign fighters in Syria, to actually fight Hezbollah in Lebanon. In other words, probably to assist the Israelis in an invasion of Lebanon to attack Hezbollah. And for some reason, they've declared openly that their main enemies are the same as the Israelis. That's one reason why they haven't resisted the Israeli invasion of South Syria, basically. So, in other words, this particular version of Islam, which these two shooters were linked to, is vehemently anti-Iran. Yet there is Netanyahu and his colleagues sitting back in occupied Palestine saying, we know Iran was behind this. And they've sent Mossad operatives to Australia already to assist with the investigation, in other words, to muddy the waters. So expect to see very soon, because Mossad does have influence on Australian intelligence services, and there's a very weak Australian government which is trying to please Washington. Even if they don't like Trump, they're trying to please Washington because that's part of their historical baggage, basically. They bought into that sort of propaganda a few months back when they claimed that the Iranian security was behind some relatively minor attacks on Jewish establishments in Australia, like, for example, the firebombing of a kosher chicken store in Bondi, as if that's of serious concern to Israeli security forces who've been attacked by the Israelis and bombed by the US. You think the the Iranian security forces have got some other things on their mind other than trying to firebomb a kosher chicken store in Sydney, on the other side of the world, basically. But nevertheless, that Mossad story was bought, hook, line and sinker by the Australian security agency, ASIO, and by the Albanese government. And that was the basis for them kicking out the Iranian ambassador several months back. So Netanyahu's trying the same thing again now, and get ready for that one, because it could be a basis also for an attack on either Lebanon or Iran or both. That's what they're angling for at the moment, I think.
But they've been attacking Lebanon for God knows how long. Like, do they really need to create some kind of justification for it when they've already been doing it?
Just the same as Gaza, basically. And unfortunately, the problem is that Lebanon has no air defenses. That's the very difficult situation Lebanon has. Neither Hezbollah nor the Lebanese military have air defenses, and so they keep bombing the south. They keep bombing Beirut, basically, and of course, the Lebanese are unhappy about that. But because the military is so subservient to the US political system, they haven't been able to defend themselves from the Israelis. And that's why Hezbollah was created back in the 80s, of course, because at least on the ground they can defend Lebanon, but they don't have any air defense there.
I guess my thing is I think the argument you're making is the strain of Islam that these two shooters belong to are not well, let me ask it this way. Would this brand of Islam find themselves in alliance, or at the very least in what's the word I'm looking for? In
the US.
Well, yeah, they obviously work with the US, but would they find themselves sympathetic to Hamas?
No.
Or the Palestinian cause?
No, and it's nothing to do with Sunni Islam, really. It's to do with Wahhabism, which is an extreme sectarian branch of terrorism coming from the Saudis mainly, but other parts of the Persian Gulf, So they hate the Shia with a vehemence, basically. They have this doctrine of takfiri, where they declare it's okay to attack and kill people because of their affiliation, because of their religious affiliation. So the Alawis in Syria and the Shia in Syria, Iraq, and Iran are their main obsession, basically. So it's impossible that people linked to the Wahhabi brand of sectarian Islam are going to be in any sort of alliance with the Iranians. It hasn't happened. But the other thing is they have worked very closely with the US. You see now how welcome Jelani is in the White House. Of course, he's Trump's favorite now that they've got rid of a pluralist regime. Whatever you thought of the Assad government, it was genuinely pluralist and inclusive, and it was anti-Israel, and it was defending Syrian territory from the Israelis, basically. And Jelani's done the entire opposite of that. So the Australian Air Force, I know from my own investigations, collaborated with the US Air Force about 9 years ago to attack the Syrian army on a mountain behind Deir ez-Zor airport so that ISIS would take over that mountain and eventually take over the airport. They didn't take over the airport, as it turned out, but they killed over 120 Syrian soldiers to support directly ISIS. I know there's a lot of claims about indirect support, but they have engaged, the Australian military and the US military have engaged directly to support ISIS in Syria. And the Israelis, for their part, have patched up ISIS fighters and others who of similar ideology who came across into northern Israel from southern Syria in the past. And this is well known. It's of course, you know, during the dirty war on Syria, they always claimed that they were trying to fight ISIS and so on. But now we see the lie of that they've installed this former ISIS commander in Damascus, and Trump welcomes him in the White House. So the Israelis have done that too. And this is the strange thing about Bondi, that the ISIS and their allied groups never attacked Israel once. They never supported the Palestinian resistance, not at all. So what are they doing attacking Jewish people and Israelis in Sydney? There's something more to it here, and I don't know exactly what it is. It could be that the Israelis set up a false flag. They've been talking for quite some time about wanting more 9/11s. That 9/11 was a boon to them. We know that whether or not you believe the Israelis were involved in the 9/11 attacks in New York in 2001, certainly they liked it and they benefited from it and they milked it for all they can, and they're milking this Bondi massacre for all they can at the moment. So whether it was some rogue ISIS elements or whether there was something behind them that we don't know about yet, whatever the case, the Israelis are acting in the same way. Basically, they're trying to milk this for all they can. They began very quickly. They were doing visual stunts before the massacre had ended virtually, and claiming that the Australian government had to do more, and by recognising the Palestinian state, they'd incited anti-Jewish hatred in Australia. Really, it's the crimes of the Israelis that have incited Jewish hatred around the world.
Yes.
There's no greater effect on Jewish hatred than identifying all the Jewish people with the crimes of the Israeli regime, basically. But nevertheless, they're certainly trying to turn that massacre into a cause célèbre to identify the Israelis as some sort of protected species and impunity for the crimes they're committing now. So there are proposals from Australian politicians at the moment, as we speak, talking about banning further demonstrations, banning any, they've already banned effectively any discussion of Gaza in universities. You cannot discuss, I think it may be similar in some of the US universities, but in Australia, it's effectively banned. You can't talk about Gaza in universities there because they will come and take people's employment away, as they did with me before the Gaza genocide, for speaking out against the Israelis. Now, they're trying to muzzle in many ways, although they've been doing it for some time now. They're trying to increase the scope of that. And they have some lobbyists who are acting as so-called anti-Semitism advisors to the government, urging new measures to repress any criticism or discussion of the crimes carried out by the Israelis.
How ironic. Netanyahu has given a speech effectively saying more needs to be done to tamp down on, quote, anti-Semitism, unquote, as he effectively massacres hundreds of thousands of people in Gaza. It's like the irony.
Why anyone listens to him is beyond me. What sort of moral authority does an indicted war criminal indicted for genocide and crimes against humanity, what sort of moral authority does such a person have? Why do people even listen to him?
Correct me if I'm wrong, though. Hamas backed the Wahhabist overthrow of the Syrian government, right?
Not exactly, no. The military arm of Hamas, which is Ezzedine al-Qassam, they had back at the beginning of the Color Revolution in Syria, they had one foot in the resistance camp and one foot in the Muslim Brotherhood camp. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, which Hamas professed to be a branch of in the late 80s until 2017, certainly had a history of collaboration with the British Empire and then the US after that. And they got some favors from the Netanyahu, from the Israeli regime, basically, because the Israeli regime wanted to incite sectarian conflict between the factions of the Palestinian resistance, in particular between Fatah and between Hamas, but the other factions as well. And by the way, Fatah has two armed groups that have been active in Gaza, so it's not that Fatah is totally the Palestinian Authority and the collaborationist regime under Abu Mazen in Ramallah. Basically, there are resistance factions within Fatah also. So, but nevertheless, the Israelis wanted to incite a conflict between the Palestinian factions, and they didn't create Hamas, as some people say, but they gave favorable treatment to them to try and keep that sectarian incitement going. Now, Hamas, in about 2017, when there was an attack by the Saudis on Qatar. Now, Qatar is one of the Muslim Brotherhood bases. The other one is Erdogan's regime in Turkey, basically. Back in the day, there was also a Muslim Brotherhood. Briefly, there was a Muslim Brotherhood president in Egypt. That didn't last very long. But in 2017, the Saudis, the Crown Prince, launched these attacks on Qatar, which sought refuge with Iran, by the way, because the Saudis closed all the airspace to Qatar, so Qatar Airways couldn't fly. And Iran actually helped Qatar back at that time, even though the Muslim Brotherhood is vehemently anti-Shia, just as the Wahhabis are. So in other words, there was a type of collaboration between Wahhabist sectarian terrorism and Muslim Brotherhood terrorism in the region, and particularly in Syria and Iraq at that time. But because the sponsors were fighting, the Saudis wanted to bring the Qataris to heel. Basically, there was friction there. So in the end, the haven for Hamas in Qatar was undermined, and the Hamas was convinced to go back to their original sponsorship with Iran. They went back to Iran. Iran encouraged them to Hamas, at least the resistance groups, to repair their relations with Assad in Syria, and they did that basically. Although it may not have been very profound, because the Syrian government before the ISIS takeover in December 2024 was there was a deep history of mistrust and a lot of blood between the Syrian government and the Muslim Brotherhood. But nevertheless, there was a repairing of those relations. And in the 2017 charter, Hamas removes its identification with the Muslim Brotherhood, and now it's very close to Tehran, basically. So
I see.
you can say, for example, the late Yahya Sinwar, the architect of the October 7 uprising, basically declared that their support, their sponsorship from Iran was absolutely central to them, and praised the then Syrian government at that time. So, with the exception of some political figures who were the ones that took the political branch of Hamas to Qatar back in 2012, most of the Hamas resistance is now unified, basically, and Hamas, when the Western media talks about Hamas, they're really talking about a coalition in Gaza, which is led by Hamas, because there are other factions who've made very big contributions to the resistance against the Israeli invasion there. In particular, the Islamic Jihad, which has never been sectarian anti-Iran, and the Popular Front, and some of the Fatah factions and some other smaller factions. So when the Western media talks about Hamas and the Israelis talk about Hamas, they're talking about a Hamas-led coalition, which really has worked very closely together in recent times. Basically, there isn't that sectarian split now in Gaza between the factions. They work together, and so that historical link. Even I was in Syria early last year, in early 2024, and I was asking some of the Syrian army that were positioned around the Yarmouk camp, which was the biggest camp of Palestinian refugees outside Palestine, outside occupied Palestine, what had happened with the relations with Hamas. And they said, well, our leadership says now everything's changed. We're now allied with Hamas. And so the Syrian army at that time was a very disciplined group, and they accepted that there was a new political conditions, and that Hamas was really aligned to them, basically. So that's a bit of history that happened. And by the way, when there was a split between Iran and, because a split with Iran meant a split with Hezbollah as well, and not just and Syria. So during that time, there was a disagreement within Ezzedine al-Qassam, the military arm of Hamas, and those that wanted to keep their relations with Hezbollah and Iran were effectively put under some sort of house detention in Gaza back at that time there. So it wasn't a unanimous thing. So things have changed, basically. Some of the Hamas factions did play a role in some of the fighting in Syria up until about 2015, 2016. After that, things changed.
With Israel being part of this investigation, what are your expectations of this investigation?
Well, they're clearly going to try and muddy the waters. They're going to try and divert from the links that the Australian intelligence has already said that they've registered of these two shooters with a Wahhabi-linked training group there. The young man was learning to recite the Quran, but it was at a center which had a lot of the works of the Saudi Wahhabi preachers. Right. And then ASIO has also said that they were linked to a Philippines militant group, which also has Wahhabi funding, Wahhabi backing, basically. So there's a very strong link to the Saudi line of sectarian terrorist Islam there already established. The Israelis will try and bury that and find some sort of link to Hezbollah or Iran so that they can have another casus belli for attacking either Lebanon or Iran or both of them. I firmly believe that's what they're trying to do at the moment. And unfortunately, the Mossad will have influence in the Australian political system because we have a government that's very weak and compliant to the wishes of the US, and they don't want to contradict the Israelis too savagely. Of course, they've gone along with this recognition of a Palestinian state, but that really is largely symbolic. And you had another 120 odd states that were doing it at the UN. So it seemed a sort of safe compromise to try and improve their image, basically, because, of course, the image of the Australian government, like a lot of Western governments, has taken a battering because they still have these ongoing direct collaborations with the Israeli regime, including military collaborations, making parts for the F-35 project, for example, and it's terribly unpopular here. They've suffered quite a lot in opinion polls there. So this symbolic act of recognizing a Palestinian state, while still trying to cover up the fact that they're collaborating directly with the Israelis, is an attempt to secure their image domestically more than anything else, basically.
Do you have this belief that Israel is going to, let's say, use this as a way of trying to create some kind of justification to attack Iran? Or do you believe that
they're doing it right now? They're doing it right now, no doubt about that. Whatever were the motivations of the shooters, the Israelis are already doing that right now.
Well, I guess the question is, do you think they will attack Iran? Maybe that's the better way to put it.
They want to, and many of us thought that they were going to do it earlier in the year, maybe in September. But of course, things got complex. They were attacking so many people earlier this year. What they were attacking the flotilla in Tunisian waters. They were attacking Qatar. Now they've got their ambitions have got away from them. They're talking about many of these Israeli boffins, the pro-genocide advocates, are saying, after we destroy Iran, they're getting ahead of themselves. We have to deal with the Muslim Brotherhood, which means Turkey and Qatar. Basically, they already attacked Qatar because Qatar was serving as a base for the talks with the Hamas leadership there. Basically, also the largest U.S. military base in the whole region, which tells you a lot about Qatar and its embeddedness with the U.S. military, basically. Right. But nevertheless, the Israelis attacked them. That was unexpected, and I think the Qataris were shocked. A lot of the Persian Gulf collaborators were shocked because they thought that having U.S. military there was some sort of protection from Israeli attacks. It seems not. So, and then of course the whole situation in Lebanon, as you say, the ceasefire means nothing to the Israelis. They kept attacking Lebanon without stop, just as they kept attacking Gaza after the ceasefire. It means nothing to them. It's something they want the other side to deal with. They want the ceasefire as a technique to disarm the resistance in Gaza, to disarm the resistance in Lebanon. But it doesn't apply to the Israelis because they're, after all, the exceptional people, the chosen people who can do what they want, and international law doesn't apply to them. They say this many times quite openly, particularly in the Hebrew media, and people don't seem to appreciate that's the way they think too, that international law doesn't apply to them. Ceasefire agreements don't apply to them. The Trump peace plan, yes, it applies to the other side. It doesn't apply to them. That's the way they think.
One last question before I let you go, and thank you again for joining me on this. Again, that's my fault. You have my apologies for getting the text message screwed up. Pax, so there's this question about bringing in a defense force into Gaza from various countries.
Yeah.
And up to this point, there doesn't seem to be any takers on this. I know at one point Indonesia said that they were willing to send troops. I don't know if that's still going to be the case. You have Pakistani defense minister that is supposed to be going to Washington, D.C. And I believe it's Reuters has a story out saying this is going to be a huge test because Pakistan is not going to be for sending troops at the behest of Israel into Gaza. And yet this is going to be something that the United States is going to be pressing him to do. He has the power to do it, but there's going to be also chaos if he does do it. And it doesn't seem to be the case that many of the other Arab states are all that enthused or even have it on the marquee of sending troops into Gaza.
They will look for some of the weakest, like Jordan and Morocco, for example, the regimes that have collaborated most closely with them. But you're right that in theory, there are nations like the Indonesians who said we would be part of a peacekeeping mission, basically, to protect the people in Gaza. But as it's turned out, it's not a UN operation. There's no Chapter 7 authorization for this. It's some sort of vague political thing, which is going to be under the control of Washington and the Israelis, basically. And of course, the Palestinians have made it very clear that they reject it because it's really an attempt to re-establish the occupation, or rather reoccupy Gaza and develop these sort of zones where the Israelis will carve out half of Gaza or more than half of Gaza and stay there, basically. They won't respect their side of it anyway. So there's going to be resistance, and any sensible government, like whether it's Pakistan or Indonesia, which has some sympathy of the Palestinians, doesn't want to get into a firefight with the Palestinian resistance, basically. Imagine the scandal amongst their own people if they go in and start repressing the Palestinians on behalf of the Israelis. It's going to look very bad. And of course, that's the difference between the theory and the practice here, isn't it? If there was some sort of UN force to push the Israelis out of Gaza and re-establish the infrastructure and aid into Gaza, that would be an entirely different thing. But this Trump plan is something that aims to maintain the occupation, to reject any idea of Palestinian participation in their own governance, basically, and to really reimpose with some sort of half-hearted UN legitimacy a so-called peace plan. I think the reason why Russia and China didn't oppose it in the Security Council was because they thought the Palestinian Authority, which is a deeply compromised body, and the linked PLO, which is controlled by the same people, even though there's never been an election for the PLO. So it's not representative of the Palestinian people, but they were supporting it. And all of the Arab regimes in the Security Council even Algeria was supporting it, basically. And Algeria has a better history than that, but on this occasion, they didn't oppose it, basically. So in those circumstances, I think there was no Palestinian allies at the UN level and no Arab allies at the UN level. China and Russia spoke against it, but in the end abstained rather than support or oppose it, basically, because of that. But anyway, the message is out there that it's well known that this is a very bad option, and it's something that really violates the rights of the Palestinians. It's going to be opposed by the Palestinians in Gaza and anywhere else, basically. So I don't think any sensible regime, I don't think the Indonesians or the Malaysians or the Pakistanis who are sympathetic to the Palestinian people are going to make the mistake of getting involved there. So if it's something run by the Israelis and Trump, which seems that's what it is, although it isn't spelled out in the Security Council resolution, it's not really a UN operation. The UN Security Council has given a sort of a green light to some outside body to do something to stop the fighting, which sounds on the surface laudable, and no one wants to be blamed for stopping, for preventing a ceasefire or stopping the shooting war going on. But what comes in its wake is another story. So I don't think it's clear that sort of what's it called? It's not called a peacekeeping operation. It's called something else.
What is it called?
Whatever it is,
some kind of defense force. Yeah,
some sort of force there to disarm the resistance. Imagine that. There's no sympathetic group to the Palestinians who's going to want to be involved in that. Disarm the resistance and not disarm the criminals who are committing genocide in Gaza. What's that all about? It doesn't take a lot to realize that this is an impossible task, and it's going to be a disaster if some sympathetic state sends in its forces and those forces are fired at by the Palestinians who are fighting for their lives and for their own control of their own territories.
Yeah, because my thing was always, well, is that defense force going to turn their guns on Israel if Israel is violating the terms of ceasefire? And the answer seems to be no. Like, I mean, Israel has shot at UN troops, for God's sake. So I don't know
that on already, but I mean, the Lebanese resent the role that the UN troops have played in the south of Lebanon too, basically. So it's not a good history there, basically. It would be, the only plausible thing would be if some outside power like China or Russia said, okay, we're going to go and bring some aid into Gaza. After all, it's not Israeli territory under any sort of international law. An outside power could do it, but an outside power would have to face the Israelis. None of the Europeans were prepared to do that with the flotilla. It's possible, it hasn't happened yet, but that an outside power like Russia or China could say, well, this is Palestinian territory, we can sail and we can protect any aid shipments going in there, basically. This is something we should be talking about. We should be encouraging, really, because Russia and China haven't done what they could do, and they could, to some extent, rescue their failed credibility here. They've left it in the hands of the US to control these sorts of things, basically.
Yes.
Because they don't see it as directly in their interest, and they don't want to be branded with spoilers in terms of spoiling a potential ceasefire. But I think the world would applaud if China or Russia sent out their military to protect the delivery of aid into Gaza, for example. I think the world would applaud that, and it would be a great bonus for those states in their own interest. And because we know that both Russia and China want to be seen to be operating as great powers, being able to deliver some things that aren't just to do with their own interests, basically. They haven't done much of it yet, but they're protecting their own interests, of course, but they could do something in this area. It would be laudable. I think the world would applaud it if they did.
Yeah, agreed. But up to this point, both Russia and China has continued to effectively work with Israel. They haven't broken ties or.
Well, they've been critical of Israel, but they haven't actually followed through to actually
do anything.
In fact, I think even Putin said some time ago, could have been 2 years ago, that he wanted to do some sort of humanitarian intervention to help Gaza, but he didn't. In the end, he backed off. He's obviously got his focus on the war in Ukraine, but it's still possible that they could do something like that.
Tim?
They would get away with it because the Israelis wouldn't want to attack Russia or China, basically, and I don't think the US would intervene militarily to block the delivery of aid in those circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Tim Anderson. Tim, thank you for this, man. I really appreciate it. He's a writer and a nationalist, academic, and director for Center for Counter-Hegemonic Studies, and you can find him at Counter-Hegemonic Studies-site. You have my appreciation, man. You be safe and have a good night, okay?
Thanks, Jamal. Talk to you later.
Bye-bye. All right. Shout out to Tim. He always gives a great breakdown. Yes, I misread that text. It is a 16-hour difference between the United States on the East Coast and Australia. And when I initially read the text, I thought he said, for some reason in my mind, it was, there's no issue with me showing up at that time frame because it's like 11:15. I just misread it. But he was nice enough to come on nonetheless. And so he has my appreciation for coming on. Great breakdown by Tim. I would like to read, just as a hard pivot before Ted Rall comes on the show, to have a conversation about Susie Wiles. I don't know if you guys have seen this. So Susie Wiles, Trump's chief of staff, has several interviews that are hilarious, humiliating, and she effectively takes aim at nearly, well, for one, the president, but the president's staff on top of the president. Then when asked about this, they said something to the effect of, well, you know, this isn't true, this is inaccurate. Okay, well, none of the stuff and the things that she has effectively said has been contradicted. And on top of none of those things being contradicted, she's recorded. So it's not like, hey, I didn't say that. She said all of it. All of it is within context. It is pretty wild. She talks about everything from Trump to Zelensky. I think she says Trump is an alcoholic personality. She contradicts many of the decisions that Donald Trump effectively went with, saying that she and many of the other people were effectively overruled that were trying to give Donald Trump, and let's say, better advice. It's wild. It is very wild. So that should be a really good conversation with Ted. In the meantime, before he gets here, oh, and I didn't get a chance to say this. If you guys find yourself digging this content, you find yourself coming back here often, like the video, share the video. You can always support this content. PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, memberships, buy me a coffee. Oh, there's so many of these things. Super stickers, all of these things help support the content. And you have my deepest appreciation for your support. Even if it's just liking the video and leaving a comment, you have my thanks for doing so. I want to read what Donald Trump wrote on Twitter. I want to read what he wrote on Twitter. This is deranged, transparently stupid, so over the top that you would think it's comical, but obviously it's not comical because they've been effectively murdering up to 90 people at this point in the Caribbean, many of which were just fishermen. The one boat that he seems to be getting a lot of flack for is a boat that wasn't even headed for the United States. So put that in context. They murdered people who weren't even headed for the United States, meaning the shallow premise, the fig leaf that's showing testicle and tip of pee-pee that they were running with even falls apart in the narrative of the September 2nd attack, because that boat wasn't even headed for the United States. And even the other narratives that they were effectively running with, a boat would have to refill like 8 times before it could get to the United States under the premise to which the United States is effectively running with. And again, if you indeed believe that these boats are delivering drugs to the US, and you have such military might, you have drones, you have all of these things that you are literally observing the boat to the point where you can destroy the boat. You can also stop the boat, board the boat, and get your hands on the contraband that you claim is on the boat. They didn't do it because of reporting pointed out that they didn't want these people in the United States, which is what it boiled down to. They don't want these people to have the day in court. They want, or better off, just murdering them, which is what they've been doing. Trump comes out and puts this tweet out, which, again, would be laughable if we were watching it on some kind of television show. But it would probably be too outlandish to even put on a television show. Venezuela is completely surrounded by the largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America. So we are to believe that Venezuela is such a threat to the United States that it need to be surrounded by the, quote, largest armada ever assembled in the history of South America, unquote. It would only get bigger, and the shock to them would be like nothing they've ever seen before, until such time as they return to the United States of America, the oil, the land, and other assets that they previously stole from the United States. They've stolen nothing from the United States. They've stolen nothing from the U.S. The illegitimate Maduro regime is using oil from these, quote, stolen oil fields to finance themselves, unquote, drug terrorism, human trafficking, murder, and kidnapping. For the theft of, mind you, the person who is murdering Venezuelan fishermen in the Caribbean, the person that effectively backed a genocide, is claiming that another government is dealing with murder, kidnapping, and human trafficking and drug terrorism. That's outrageous. For the theft of our assets and many other reasons, including terrorism, drug smuggling, and human trafficking, the Venezuelan regime has been designated as a foreign terrorist organization just by the U.S., which, take for what it's worth. Therefore, today I'm ordering a total and complete blockade of all sanctioned oil tankers going into and out of Venezuela. The illegal aliens and the criminals that Maduro regime has sent to the United States during this weak and inept Biden administration are being returned to Venezuela at a rapid pace. America will not allow criminals, terrorists, and other countries to rob, threaten, or to harm the nation, and likewise will not allow a hostile regime to take our oil, land, and other assets, all of which must be returned to the United States immediately. Thank you for your attention to this matter. That is deranged. That is deranged. This is one of the dumbest psychopaths that we've ever had in that office. And that is saying a lot, considering we've had a lot of dumb psychopaths in that office. But all of these people that are giving Donald Trump a pass saying, oh, he's really a nice guy. Bullshit. He's a murderer and a killer. And he's been part of the reason that he's trying to get the International Criminal Court to effectively give the U.S. a pass is because he is committing mass murder on a grand scale before our very eyes. Oh, he's a nice guy. Whatever. Sociopath. Let me bring in my guests. We are joined with the one, the only Ted Rall, political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, host of TMI with the one and only Manila Chan, also Deprogram with John Kiriakou. And he also has another show that comes on Thursday with Scott Stantis, I believe. Correct. Is that right? Wow, I believe that. I remember that off the top of my head. That's badass. How you doing, man? You doing okay, Ted?
I'm doing good. How are you doing? That's quite the background, by the way.
I'm having prodigious.
Flashback.
It is prodigious. You should see this kitchen. This kitchen is awesome.
I actually think
this kitchen is awesome. He has like stickers of all sorts of like UFO stuff, black holes, mushrooms, all sorts of stuff. Like they were totally creeping when they did this kitchen. No, it's great. I like it. I wish I could stay here longer, actually. I mean, my visa's only lasts for a month here, but I wish I could stay longer. I actually like it here. Ted,
he's my flyaway.
Well, there is a provision that I may be able to exploit. It's the extended visa, but we'll see. But Ted, I'm happy that you can join me. When I asked you to join, Donald Trump hasn't necessarily put the naval blockade up on Venezuela. I might as well get your take on that also, because I find it to be deranged. But give me your thoughts.
Well, I don't know. Jamal, have you ever been to Cuba?
I have not, unfortunately. I've always wanted to go, but I have not.
It's great if you ever get the chance, do it. So the thing is, the government of Cuba, the communist government of Cuba, the number one thing that maintains its political support on the island of Cuba is what they call el blockado, which is the U.S. Basically, it's Spanish for blockade, obviously, but it means. But basically, it's about all of the economic sanctions and that are directed toward Cuba, and whether this is the purpose of sanctions is always, you put pressure on the people, it hurts the economy, and then the idea is that they will overthrow they'll blame their government and overthrow it. It basically never works, but that's the idea, right? Cuba is a perfect illustration of like how it has exactly the opposite impact. Probably the number one thing that would have brought down Cuban communism, and so I should say socialism because it's not really communism, would have been integration. Basically, if the U.S. had invested a lot of money in Cuba, had sent tons of American tourists, we would have corrupted them. But basically, we isolated them and created the one thing every government wants, a really bad enemy that's even worse than your government. So that Cuba, I just think of Cuba when I read this morning. Like, first of all, the word blockade. Venezuela and Cuba aren't just two Spanish-speaking countries in Latin America. They're close political and allies, and have been for years. They have long-standing historical ties. So inside Venezuela, the word blockade has a very they're well aware of what's going on to the blockado in Cuba, and so this is kind of like, it sends a clear message: we're going to treat you the way we've been treating Cuba. It's also sending the message, well, Cuba's resisted this effort for longer than my old 62-year-old ass has been alive. Okay, and so it's kind of like, okay, basically it's like we're selling, hey, U.S. to Venezuela, fuck you, and Venezuela, you can beat us, you can outlast us. The Cubans did, and you don't. Cuba doesn't have the world's biggest oil reserves, which Venezuela does. I mean, Venezuela has nothing to worry about here. It is psychotic. It is this effort at regime change is the idea of it is ridiculous, and it's not something that ought to have been contemplated in the first place. But also, the execution is horrid, and it's also bizarre because we're back to WMDs. Well, Donald Trump ran against the Iraq War in the 2016 primaries and talked about how stupid it was. Well, why was it stupid? WMDs, they didn't exist. It was fake. Now, we're not even alleging that Venezuela has actual WMDs. We're redefining drugs as WMDs, and we're claiming that those drugs are coming to the U.S., which they're not, and we're claiming that it's a different drug than what the drugs that possibly really are, the ones that are not coming to the U.S. I mean, there's so many. I mean, the thing is, I'm not even sure I would qualify this as lies. It's just it's a tsunami of bullshit, and it counts on the fact that the media is in disarray and incompetent and stupid, which is true, and the fact that the American people just don't really care because they're working 55 hours a week trying to keep their heads above water to pay their bills, and they can't follow all the nuances here, and they just can't be bothered. None of this is going to work out well for the president. I just have to say, this is a well-trod path that basically leaves you, disgraces your presidency and hurts your approval rating. It's literally, from a Trumpian point of view, the stupidest thing he could possibly be doing.
Yeah, it's outlandish. Like, all of this is outlandish. I don't even know who believes the drug thing. Like, meaning, I don't know if anybody, there are some cultists out there that says Trump is fighting for America. Okay, take that 2% and put them to the side. I don't know if anybody even believes this nonsense. It's like, and then when they ask them about the vote on September 2nd, which blows my mind, that is the one thing that the media seems to be focused on. It's like, well, hey, are you going to show us the video for September 2nd? It's like, dude, they murdered like 90 people. Why do you need this one video to justify anything at this point? And they're like, yeah, but they double tapped the guy. Okay.
Yeah. But it's not sporting, Jamal. It doesn't follow Queensberry rules. It's like you're allowed to blow up random civilians who you don't even know their names, much or their professions or anything or what they're up to. It's just a boat. So you're allowed to do that. That's fine. But if any of them survive, well, then you have to rescue them. Everybody knows. I mean, Jamal, what are you? I know it's totally.
And then he points out, we have the largest naval armada surrounding Venezuela because Venezuela is apparently that much of a threat where you need a naval armada to blockade the country. And my first thought was like, okay, so the relationship with Russia, China, Iran, and any of these other countries, what do you think these countries are going to do when you're trying to wave off their boats? Like, this is an act of war. Like, in the clearest terms, it's an act of war.
Well, that's true.
It's outrageous.
We, of course, nobody knows this. You know this, but this is how the World War II in the Pacific started, right? The U.S. imposed a naval blockade on Japan. They viewed it as an act of war. They thought that Pearl Harbor was sort of like a warning, like cut it out, like swatting a dog on the nose with a newspaper. That they thought we wouldn't care that much because Hawaii wasn't a state, it wasn't fully part of the U.S. They're like, cut it out. But they didn't count on Americans' ability to blame you for your own victimhood So, yeah, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, blockades are bad. I mean, the blockade had the blockade of Nazi Germany had a horrific effect on the Holocaust, right? I mean, the Holocaust wouldn't have happened if not for that. Nazi Germany would have expelled its Jews from Europe, which would have been heinous, but better than what happened. And and they only developed the final solution at the Wannsee Conference, and all the death camps in response to the naval blockade. They're like, well, we want to get rid of these Jewish people, but we can't get rid of them because of the Allied naval blockade of Europe. I mean, it's not good policy,
Well, nobody was going to take them either. That was that. I mean, there were boats that were not accepted at various ports. I mean, yeah. Let's talk Susie Wiles. I have been reading through this and I've been fascinated by this. Fascinated on two counts. The shit that she talked about everybody. Like she trashed everybody. Like she had no F's to give in giving just an open and seemingly straightforward assessment of her thoughts about Trump, her thoughts about some of the policies that he's gone with, like tariffs, the thing with Venezuela, like across the board, various people in his administration. And then all of this was taped, by the way. And then when she was asked about it, she's like, "Oh, I was taken out of context. I was misquoted. Oh, that's not what I said." It's like, dude, you are taped. None of this was taken out of context. They couldn't even point out anything that she said that they quibbled with, per se.
Yeah, she's not denying that she said it. She said it.
Yes, which is even more amazing.
And also, by the way, as a veteran of libel lawsuits, let me just say, if it's really true in official Washington that a major magazine, Condé Nast magazine, decided to deliberately misquote the White House chief of staff in order to make her look bad to the president, oh, that's a big lawsuit, a big lawsuit. And if that's true, you have to file that lawsuit to prove that you're telling the truth. But the fact that there's no lawsuit and there's not going to be a lawsuit, it's all true. Now, the only thing I'm willing to give her is the possibility that, some stuff was, judiciously edited to find all the juicy bits and make and omit anything that's like, exposes sarcasm but she's a big girl. Okay. And she knows she gave 11 interviews to this reporter.
Yes.
So, so the point is she's a big girl and she knows how this works. I mean, you and I both know how this works and we're not at her level. It's like when you talk to a reporter, and the tape recorder is running, they can use any phrase, any sentence, as long as it's in order. And if there's anything missing, they drop that ellipses in there. That's fine. So you got to be careful about what you say. And and if you're not, this is what's going to happen. But go ahead. I mean, I'm fascinated by the fact that MAGA world is rallying around her.
Even that's mind blowing, right? There's so much of this that is just like, wow, I can't believe she said that openly. Like, even if you thought it, even if you talked about, you're on the phone with some rando having this kind of heart to heart about it, like, God, man, I can't believe this stuff is taking place. She is saying this openly to the
she basically called Trump a dry drunk.
Yes. So there are a few things, right? So she says that she said that she had read the Epstein documents and acknowledged that Trump's name is in them. Well, obviously. She says she urged Trump not to pardon the most violent January 6th offenders. He ignored her advice. She admitted that Trump is looking for retribution. Quote, when there's an opportunity, he will go for it. There's that. She tried to convince Trump to stop, quote, score settling, unquote, against political enemies after 90 days in office. This effort failed because of Donald Trump's desire for retribution. She directly contradicted Trump's claim about Bill Clinton, stating there's no evidence that Clinton ever visited Epstein's private island. So not only is she contradicting her boss, she is like just outright disagreeing with him. She says here's the other one, the dry drunk. She says she described Trump as having a, quote, alcoholic personality. unquote. She said that her ability to work with him comes from growing up with an alcoholic father, sportcaster Pat Summerall.
Oh,
They
I remember
call
Pat
him an
Summerall.
alcoholic. Yeah. Like she's basically saying he acts like an alcoholic. That's why I can get along with him, because my dad was a drunk.
Mm-hmm.
There's more on Vice President J.D. Vance. While so that he has been, quote, a conspiracy theorist for a decade, unquote, and that his conversation or his conversion from a Trump critic to a loyalist was politically driven. Basically, I don't know if people remember, J.D. Vance called Trump Adolf Hitler, effectively called him Hitler. And then somewhere along the way had this kind of political conversion. Her point is it was entirely political. He,
yeah. He's an
well, I think that's
opportunist.
obvious, right?
I mean, look, I mean, we're human beings are opportunistic. We've evolved over 2 million years to, you know, if we see something to eat, we're gonna figure out a way to eat it, right? That's why we're still here. But I mean, and you know, look, but the thing is, it's transparent, right? I mean, there's some cases like that, sort of like when Bill Maher was fired from ABC, it suited, and liberals rallied to him, not really understanding that he wasn't one of them. That basically he was like, oh, well, my future lies in sucking up to these liberals. So, you know, I've got to pivot and at least for a while kind of pretend to be kind of sort of liberal, at least in tone, if not in content. And I mean, it's a little shady, right? But what Vance did was on a whole different level. He didn't go from like sort of centrist Democrat to who shut the fuck up about Trump to Trump's vice president. He went from like full-throated critic of, you know, threat to American democracy, TM, patent pending, to this is to, you know, like Donald, you know, like Donald Trump is the reincarnation of Jesus Christ our Lord. And like, so I mean, that's ridiculous, you know, and without any kind of conversion, you know, Paul, you know, on the road to Damascus kind of, you know, conversion story, like, well, I thought this, but now I changed my mind, and here's why. None of that, right? So it's why he's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Here's another one. She described Elon Musk as an avowed ketamine user, an odd duck whose actions were often not rational and left her aghast. An avowed ketamine user. She called budget.
That's true, though, right? I mean,
well, that's funny too. I mean, that's the question: is it true?
It is true. But
yeah.
I mean, Elon would say so, right? So it's true. RFK Jr. Also, I don't know what it is about the Trumpies, man. The special K is flying around the corridors of power. I've never tried. I don't judge. Maybe it's awesome, but you know.
Yeah, I've never tried ketamine. I mean, like, I don't see cat tranquilizers being a party drug. Like, I don't even know whether that's.
I don't. Yeah, like as a rule, if it's made for an animal, you probably shouldn't take it. Just saying.
Well, I don't even get the draw from it. I mean, it just makes you like narcoleptic or something, right? Or you just kind of like you're vibing out, just nearly on the brink of death. Yeah, I don't get it. I never quite understood that one. I mean, there's a few drugs I don't quite get, to be honest, but that's definitely one of them. But apparently, if that's what he gets his jollies off with, God bless him, I suppose. She defended USAID, saying that anyone who has paid attention to the government knows that they do very good work. She says Attorney General Pam Bondi completely whiffed the handling of the Epstein files, explaining, quote, first she gave binders full of nothingness, then she claimed the witness list or client list was on her desk. There is no client list, and it sure as hell wasn't on her desk. Okay, I don't believe there's not a client list, but whatever. She said the administration needed to, quote, look harder at deportations to avoid mistakes. Well, again, this is complete contradictions of her boss, right? Referring to the two mothers who were arrested and deported with their children after voluntarily attending routine immigration meetings, Wiles said, quote, I can't understand how you make that mistake, but somebody did, unquote. She said she tried to unsuccessfully get Donald Trump to delay major tariffs, citing a, quote, huge disagreement, unquote, among his advisors. Yeah, I bet there was. Anybody who had common sense would have been like, hey, this doesn't seem like a good idea. And she said, Weil summed up Trump's governing mindset. He operates with a belief that there is nothing he can't do, zero, nothing. I mean, there's just a few. There's other ones. I mean, they hit Zelensky. They hit all sorts of stuff. That's amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, I always appreciate a candid assessment that comes out before it's too late, which is the usual way. You know, like, oh yeah, well, we always knew Joe wasn't all there. You know, like, yeah, sure. So thank you, Susie Wiles. I mean, that's I think part of what's going on here is, by most accounts, she's a very effective chief of staff. You know, she's viewed as like a real adult in the room. You know, and therefore, and those are hard to. I mean, you know, everyone knows in Washington that is maybe the hardest job now. And so, you know, you're a gatekeeper to the president of the United States. So, you know, I think that's what's keeping her safe. I wonder, I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, if I went to work for a White House or forget about that. If I worked for XYZ Corporation and I had an interview request from, you know, a trade journal, I would go to my boss and say, hey, so, you know, Amalgamated, you know, Soda Pop Corporation newspaper wants to interview me. Like, she didn't go to the president, in this case, her boss, and say, hey, so Vanity Fair wants to interview me. What do you think? And oh, go ahead and do it. Oh, okay. So how candid should I be? How should I handle this? It doesn't seem like that's what happens here. It seems like she just, yeah, okay. Let's grab some Irish coffees and like sit down and like shoot the shit. Really?
And to do it 11 times.
Amazing.
I mean, I'm just amazed at her candidness. Like, usually you BS your way through these, right? When they ask you a question you don't want to answer. Yeah. And she just seems to be fancy free, footloose. I tell you whatever you want to know.
Almost like it's a form of transparency, right? I mean, so Lincoln Steffens, who was a big progressive muckraker of the early 20th century, he was an ally of Theodore Roosevelt, and he was tickled pink when, you know, McKinley got killed and Roosevelt became president, because he's like, all the progressives were like, well, we finally have one of ours in the White House. And TR didn't disappoint. And one of the things he did when Lincoln Steffens came to visit him in the White House, TR wrote out a letter and said, please give Mr. Steffens, you know, to whom this may concern, let him sit in on any meeting, let him see any file in the federal government that he ever wants in perpetuity.
Wow.
So you know, and this is not rescindable. And like, basically, he was like, come on in. And he let journalists, like muckraking journalists, run around the corridors of power and just hang out. And that's transparency, right? It's radical transparency. I've always said, if I were president, I would have every cabinet meeting and every significant meeting that is not highly classified, have it live streamed, so that anybody who wants to watch it can watch it anytime they want and store it. I mean, after all, you're a government, you work for the taxpayers. But
that's hard, because, you know, sometimes like that radical transparency inhibits people from being honest.
That's true. But like, let me put it this way. If you're kind of like suggesting, hey, maybe we should blow up random Venezuelans in the middle of the ocean, but because there's a camera there and you decide not to say that, is that bad?
Well, no, you call the guy later and say, hey, by the way, I think we need to blow up boats in the Caribbean. I'm just being honest, right? It's like it inhibits your ability to be straightforward, because you don't want everything to be shown on TV. It's like you try to craft your image.
They're not entitled to secrecy. That's really my point.
Yeah.
You know.
No, I accept that. I do accept that. But if you are an administration official and you want, like, for example, when world leaders are having conversations, those things are usually private, because they need the ability to kind of just say whatever they need to say. And if you have a camera right there.
Again, I'm not sure I believe in it, but yeah, I'm not really sure. I don't think that's cool in a way.
Yeah.
Like, there they are involved in skullduggery. I mean, yes, secrecy causes transparency causes problems, but secrecy, I think, causes. Yeah.
Yeah. You said they were defending Susie Wiles on this.
They are.
They don't take issue with what she said. I mean, this is pretty.
All of them are like, it's fake news. They misquoted her. They're lying about her. Like, she's the best. She's great. She's going nowhere. I mean, obviously, this is the administration line that's come from the top. And, so this is the party line. So she's not about to be airbrushed out of the photos from the top of the Kremlin anytime soon. She's going to be there. She's going to stay. I don't know, like, what the assessment there is, other than this president doesn't like to fire people when they fuck up. Look at Hegseth, total fuck up, and like over and over and over. He's I mean, we all saw it coming too. But the point is, I think he thinks that if he lets go of Hegseth, and he wouldn't be, I don't think he's really 100% wrong, that it'll make him look weak. That's true. It does. When you hire someone, they turn out to be a shit show, and then you have to let them go. Yeah, you look stupid, of course. So Trump's aware of that. So I think that has more to do with it. But I mean, I don't know about you, but if I worked with her, I wouldn't trust her anymore. I wouldn't believe anything she had to say. I'd be like, what are you saying about me now, Susie?
He's never going to let her live this down. Every day she comes in the office, he's never going to let her live this shit down. I mean, but as you said, she's good at her job. Apparently, she tells him what she thinks which is a positive, I suppose, even if he ignores her. And yeah, I get from everything that I've understood, he likes her.
Yeah.
Like, it's, so I don't know, maybe her effectiveness, I suppose, whatever that means at the job, is her protection. And maybe she felt free to say it. I mean, part of me wondered also, was this a plant? Like, but I don't know why this would be a plant. Like, I don't know what would be the motivation for her to go out and them to say, okay, we're going to have you to say all of this stuff, bad mouthing and contradicting the president for some kind of show. I don't know what that would be, the motivation for that. So I don't know.
The dry drunk thing, I don't make a lot out of it, because it's public knowledge. The president's been very open about, the basic family trauma of his dead brother, right? Who is an alcoholic. And so, and he's been very clear about that. He's always said that he has a, they feel like he's OCD, that he's, obsessive. So I that's, like, to me, like, big deal. The other stuff, like Vance being conspiracy theorist, I mean, you're talking about the leading contender for the presidency, for the Republican nomination in 2028. You're talking about the sitting vice president, the man who, Donald Trump is way old. He could kick any second. And, that man could be your president, and you're calling him a conspiracy theorist and an opportunist, in a city of opportunists. That's kind of like saying a lot, right? I mean, it's really, she must not like the vice president, I would think. That's kind of like how I read it.
Like a lot of people who are around the president.
Well, she's apparently a bit of apparently she's kind of a battle axe, right? Like, she's kind of like it's just a real, like, piece of work, kind of like hard charging, like a bull. And I mean, that makes for a good chief of staff, right? But maybe the calculus is, this is the kind of person who does this job. Rahm Emanuel, right? I mean,
I was thinking the same thing. Yeah, I was thinking the exact same
thing. Giving interviews like this at all. He was much more discreet. But still, he's talking shit 6 ways till Sunday behind closed doors.
Yeah.
He's a profane dude.
Yeah, he's a degenerate also that allowed all those people in Chicago to die from lead poison. There's that
too. Yeah.
Ted, thank you for this, man. I was amazed by this. My first thought was like, I need to talk to Ted about this. He's there. I know he's paying attention to it.
It's
Ted
so
Rall,
fun.
Political cartoonist, syndicated columnist, co-host of TMI with the one and only Manila Chan. He is also hosts with John Kiriakou, Deprogrammed, and also with Scott Stantis, and that show shows up on Thursday. Ted, you have my appreciation, man. Thank you for this. Be safe, okay?
Oh, you too. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Talk soon.
All right. And I see my man in the background. We have Arnaud Develay. How you doing, Arnaud? You doing okay today?
Hello, Jamal. I'm doing fine. Thank you.
No, thank
Just a little shout out to Ted Rall. I've been a big fan of his cartoons for the better part of the last 3 decades.
Oh, have you been? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm sure he would love to hear you say that. Yeah, he's been doing it for a while. He's been doing God's work for a very long time. So, yeah. Just for the audience, Arnaud Develay. He's an author. There we are, political analyst, international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His latest book, Foreign Entanglements: Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America's Political Consensus. And Arnaud, considering that you're an international criminal lawyer, well, we have what is widely seen as an act of war that Donald Trump has just initiated, which is a naval blockade, apparently of the largest armada in South American history, quote unquote, around Venezuela. Is that legal by any stretch of quote unquote international law, as people call it?
Well, to make a long story short, no, it's, or should I say, yes, it is completely illegal. It is an act of war, yes, in humanitarian law. Bar none.
And yet, there it is.
And yet, he seems to be getting a pass. But then again, those people, they pretty much go with their impulses, and international law, the rule of law, as a general predicate, is pretty much a casualty of how they conduct politics. They don't seem to seek legal analysis from there, and God knows there are a lot of lawyers in and around the White House or executive branch at large. But the Trump administration, but not only the Trump administration. Under Obama, we had the illegal use of drone, which basically raised a lot of issues on the lack of due process pertaining to U.S. citizens at that. They might have been of foreign extraction, but yes, exactly. And useless to say, we don't have to go back to the Bush Jr. administration, but that's was pretty much connoted as well in terms of bypassing Security Council resolution bearing on the use of force, if anything. So yeah, it's par for the course. It's all in. It's a continuation of lawlessness at the highest level of a, for better or for worse, a very influential state actor. So this has the direct effect to set a precedent, and then other countries feel like they can do the same thing since the United States is doing it. That's the biggest tragedy of it all.
I am super curious from your take of what Russia, China, and Iran is going to do. All of these are trading partners with Venezuela. And if a Chinese ship, Russian ship, Iranian ship is going to Venezuela, and that ship gets either boarded, which it has been, by the way, a Russian ship was boarded off, apparently. A Chinese ship was taken. I don't think it was going to Iran, but either way, the precedent is still set. And of course, they took a Iranian ship, and Iran responded by taking another ship that was closer to Iran at that point. But I guess my thing is, how long is Russia and China going to accept this idea that their goods and services or goods are going to be blockaded from going to Venezuela? I mean, this is an illegal blockade.
It is an illegal blockade, but we're dealing with nuclear power, nuclear armed states. So as usual in those situations, you have to react somewhat cautiously. You don't want to see any escalation and frontal confrontation, open confrontation. But anything bearing on reciprocity is most likely something we're likely to see. so that our viewers can understand the context, this happens to be going on as the United States just published their military doctrine white paper, which seems to be putting, at least at the first level of analysis, say, the onus on bringing back into on the graded, updated version the Monroe, so-called Monroe Doctrine.
Mm-hmm.
And why is that important? Because we're talking about Venezuela, but the whole of Latin America is, or by and large, a lot of those countries already do have exchanges, commercial exchanges,
Yes.
crystallized in infrastructural installations, like in Peru, for instance, whose ports, that are owned partly or wholly by a Popular Republic of China. And what we understand is that this has got to cease. Every Chinese presence has to be somewhat evicted from the continent. And that's the idea if we look, closely to the doctrine.
Yes.
So Venezuela, in that sense, is but the lightning rod of a larger endeavor. And to the extent we have at the same time, a U.S. policy which still bears on telling Chinese what to do in the South China Sea, it's a little hard to take. We know the Americans are lobbying or trying to prop up countries like the Philippines, for instance, to basically, assemble a coalition of sorts in anticipation of what? In anticipation of preserving Taiwanese independence. But this is even violative of U.S. position on the issue. It's one country, two system, but it's one country. It goes back to 1971. So it's old news, but nonetheless, and that's the second level of analysis of that white paper doctrine, is that, initially they're regrouping in the Western Hemisphere, but we should add, so as to better confront the emerging strategic threat which they've decided China represents.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, you can try to reassemble the pieces of the puzzle in any way, shape, or form. The idea is that the interventionist policies are alive and well. It's just a kind of a retooling of it. And to the extent China has understood that they are, in the crosshair, why would that prevent, China from preemptively making sure that this open confrontation happens as far down the road as possible by, in that sense, making sure that the U.S. is thwarted in Latin America. So we're back to square one. Yes. I guess that somewhat alludes to answering your question. I don't know exactly how they're going to specifically address this, but they're not going to stand pat and allow the U.S. to unroll their strategy, as it were, all the way to the final stage of it.
I mean, because China has a massive port in Peru. There's that.
Yep.
Brazil is a member of BRICS. There's that.
Yes.
Venezuela could have been a member of BRICS, but apparently Brazil stepped in order to prevent that from taking place. But they obviously have a close relationship with Russia, China, and Iran at this point. Like, this is pretty mind-blowing. Because look, the Monroe Doctrine, the biggest issue was the European powers, right? The US is like, we don't want European powers in our backyard. Okay, well, it's not the European powers at this point. It's Russia, China, Iran, etc., and BRICS countries.
That's right.
They seem to be going with this idea that they're going to somehow roll up the association between...
Roll back. That's what they like to say. Roll back. They're going to roll it back.
Association between South America, Latin America, and their sovereign relationships with various other countries around the globe.
With the global south, yes.
And yes,
it is.
War. So the catch becomes, okay, well, what does the other countries do about it? Like, if the US is like, yeah, we're going to take the base in Peru. Does China says, okay, well, we don't want to have a conflict, so we're just going to let you take it. Look at what they did with Panama, right? We're going to take the base in Panama, or we're going to take the Panama Canal. Like, this stuff is outrageous. Like, this is so provocative. And I get that none of these countries want to get involved in this kind of larger war. But if that's true, then you might as well give up your base in Peru. You might as well give up the port that's in Peru. You may as well break your relationships with Brazil. You may as well break all of your relationships with the countries of South America. Meaning, how far does that go for those countries to be like, well, we don't want a conflict, so we'll just, you can take my wife, you can take my car, you can take my house. That just seems outrageous.
Well, I think the reply would be asymmetrical in nature. They will reply not symmetrically, but in an asymmetrical fashion. They have a lot of economic levers, for instance, that they can use on issues that the U.S. heavily, substantially relies on. I'm not going to get into exactly what those are, but in an integrated global economy, the U.S. having essentially subcontracted many of their some of strategic needs even to those countries, which they somewhat belittled for a long time, assuming that they would never rise to the peer level strategy, peer competitor level, to their detriment. Because today, we know that China, since we're talking about China here, have the means. They have the means to, press on their interest and make sure that the U.S. Steps back from the brink, as it were. So that remains to be seen. But to be sure, I think as we speak now, and there's been a lot of official statements, somewhat muted and kind of a down low, but nonetheless extremely clear that Venezuela is not alone. Coming from Minsk, coming from Moscow, coming from China. So we can imagine that if the U.S., because at some point, if they want to take over Venezuela, they're going to have to put boots on the ground. It's, the size of Venezuela, it's not going to be just some special teams, working in cahoots with the Central Intelligence Agency. You're going to have to do the heavy lifting here. And it's a huge place. It's a very hard terrain. We have a government, I would say, a regime which has an ideological spinal structure, which has been around for a quarter of a century, at least. So everybody's there is pretty much, a lot of them, the youngest part, they were born in it. And it's at the same time, it's not that far back that people would not remember how it was before Chavism came to power. There are a lot of frustrations, but a lot of frustrations also are born out of the sanction regime. If Venezuela, for instance, despite sitting on that huge pile of oil, cannot refine the oil in such a way as to make it, the best quality, it's only because the refineries are in need of spare parts, and obviously this has been, a very big problem, central problem. But Venezuela, otherwise, has really redistributed some of the revenues that it has been able to generate.
Yeah.
And it's almost like with Cuba. Cuba might be under sanction for 60 years plus, but I don't think anybody in their right mind would want to go back to the Batista regime. This kind of Chiquita, banana, types of regime put in place by some of those corporate types in DC. So I don't think this whole operation stands a chance in hell. And to the extent we understand that Rubio wants to take out Venezuela so he can get back ultimately at Cuba, which is really what the end game is for him, by depriving Cuba from the Venezuelan labor. Well, good luck with that. Good luck with that. They tried before. They tried back in 2019, as we all know. They pulled a guy out of the box, Jack in the Box, Mr. Guaido, God knows they spent a lot of money. They had a corporate Madison Avenue, the whole corporate media, trying to prop up this guy into the next coming of Simon Bolivar. Now they come up with this Machado woman who's completely, I don't know, she comes out of Central Casting, but she looks really kind of like spooky, and so I don't think it's going to suffice. It's not going to do it. At the end of the day, regime change requires that you get your hands dirty. You're gonna have to roll up your sleeves, open the hood, and get cranky. And they've got tens of thousands of militia, organized, trained. They can turn this into a Latin American version of Vietnam. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, because what do they have to lose? The Venezuelan, they have nothing to lose. I mean, they're fighting really at this point, of course, for their sovereignty, but they're also fighting for their dignity. So you want to get somebody motivated to go against you and really put everything on the line in doing so. You basically, tell them that they're going to be slaves again of American corporations. Their kids are not going to get access to the most basic healthcare needs, that they're going to live in abject poverty. What do they have to lose? They have nothing to lose. They would rather eke out a living on government provided subsidies as it is now than go back to those days where they were kind of relegated to shanty town and the likes. That's never going to happen.
It's wild. In the book Three Body, there's a war between the United States and Venezuela. And when I first read the book, I was like, okay, this is absurd. There's been no war between the United States and Venezuela. Why is this the thing that he's postulating in the book? And in the book, what was postulated was that the U.S. lost that war, that the one who was in charge of Venezuela, the president, effectively had a guerrilla campaign where he moved to the mountains, drew in the U.S. troops, and effectively decimated the U.S. troops with inexpensive weaponry and those type of things, where effectively overwhelmed the U.S. Occupation, in which case the U.S. has to pull out and the U.S. loses the war. And here we are. It's just like, now it seems prescient, but who knows if it will come about. Maybe Susie Wiles pointed out that Donald Trump just wants to murder people on the coast in order to try to force some kind of concession or whatever, but who knows? He may, at a certain point, he may be stupid enough to go in. Because, the difficult thing is you've had like 20-30% of the U.S. Navy sitting out in the Caribbean for like 2 months. A, that's expensive. B, you have made all of this political weight behind this.
You're in too deep. Yes.
You're in so deep.
Too
How
deep.
do you pull out?
Politically, if you don't follow up with something substantial behind that deployment of force, then you lose all political credibility.
Yeah. It's almost like self-fulfilling at a certain point.
Yeah.
What do you keep 3 months, 4 months, 5 months? How long do you keep this up? And if Maduro doesn't
Not to mention, the longer this Ukraine shenanigan is going on, in terms of, when I mean shenanigan, I mean those. I talked to A, we talked to D, we talked to C, we talked to, and in the end, we're back where we started. Nothing of substance has been, Then the Venezuelan diversion looks even more somewhat palatable for Washington. They need something. That's the only game in town in DC. It's the military intervention, but to what cost? I mean, have they thought that through? I don't think so. I doubt it.
Just as a hard pivot real quick, and just one question on Ukraine. Do you think they're being serious about this? I don't think they're being serious about the negotiations. I think this is all either the Trump administration is dumb as a box of rocks, which he is. Either he is so massively delusional that he needs therapy. If he believes that any negotiation that he makes with the European, that the Europeans are serious, which they're not. I don't even know why they're in the room. I'm having a conversation. Anything that the Europeans contribute to it is purely an effort to make it unpalatable for the Russians. That should be understood and clear as day. And yet we still go through this nonsense of, well, we'll talk with the Europeans, we'll add whatever the Europeans add to it, and then we'll take it to the Russians at some point, and Zelensky will have, and it's like, why are we doing this? What is this kabuki?
All right, why are we even bothering
here?
with this?
Obviously,
why are
anything
we
that
even
Zelensky
consulting
or
the Europeans?
add to it, it's going to be a non. Yeah, like that's my point.
Yeah. Well, some pundits
Yeah,
have
I guess
even
that's my
been
point.
going as
Like,
far as saying that why would the Russian even not intervene when they hear the metrics, the framework of the discussions taking place in Berlin and Brussels and the likes? Obviously, I mean, even the paradigm itself is completely off from what Russia wants and needs to be satisfied and move forward.
Right.
So why are we somewhat not even hearing more from the Russians as far as, if time is of the essence and people are dying, so it has to be of the essence, if we're coherent with what you, Washington, have been saying for a year now, that violence must come to a stop. We should, excuse us to kind of bug in, but what you guys are even remotely discussing in terms of, the framework, it's completely off. You're talking about security guarantees, which are akin to NATO membership, in effect. We already told you we want this neutral status in a Ukrainian constitutional amendment. It has to be the pursuit of NATO membership has to be removed from the and obviously the current clique in Kiev cannot do this because they're not legitimate.
Right.
So why don't we start at the beginning here? Remove that clique, organize in earnest elections, and it's been done in times of war. So don't tell me that you got to lift martial law, blah, blah, blah. Hand over the power to the president of the Rada, and let's take it from there. But now it's turning into a charade. It's turning into a clown show. And obviously, yes, the Trump administration, has needed time to understand the specificities of everybody's position or what kind of game some of those people might be playing. But I think they have had enough time to really brush a pretty clear picture of who is obstructing what could be and what is definitely needed going into midterm cycles, which looks really bad for you right now. A big chunk of your running for office was to put an end to this. I mean, we're talking about nuclear war, the end of the world here potentially, right? This is no small detail. And then you are still sending your business partner and your son-in-law for some 5-hour course meal, whatever, visit to Moscow. I mean, it's nice when everything is said and done. What do you get accomplished here? So because this thing is kind of like, they're spinning their wheel and people are starting noticing, then Venezuela might look increasingly like a way to divert attention from this because they're so powerless. I mean, it's the giant with the clay ankle and the guy. I mean, they're thinking about politics in such cartoonish fashion that they've got to have something that blows up before with with the US flag, and we have to blow something up, anything. But we got to flex that military machine of ours, and get some kind of result which we can then ride to mitigate what again is presenting itself as a disaster at the midterm. But so I don't know. It's really and we don't get the feeling they navigate knowing where they're going, that there's any sense of a strategic logic to what they're going through. It's kind of like one day we do this, the next day we open a new drawer. It just looks like a blind albatross, that has no idea even how to balance its wings. Like it's a drunk big bird.
And it
makes no sense.
I mean, and none of the stuff is like the Russian position hasn't changed for 3 years. It's been the exact same thing for 3 years. And they're like, we don't know what the Russians want. It's like, dude, it's been the same for 3 years. And then they come up with some kind of
So,
deal.
but I guess once we said that, I guess we could maybe, be realistic as to what we are really looking at. It's a kind of a tactical delay to somehow,
Yes, in midterms.
provide what a lot of people have been seeking, which is a continuation of the conflict.
That's precisely
Yeah,
the point that I'm making.
that's what that's the end game. They want to perpetuate the conflict. The only question at this point is who's going to pay for it and who's going to send their sons and daughters, because at some point they're going to be running out of Ukrainians. So they've got to work out something that somewhat, is ends, all those rash of political persecution and arrest and sanction people in Europe right now. It's an hysterical atmosphere going on. We've had a couple of people that we know in our circles that have been inscribed on the listings.
Mhm.
No due process, no examination of anything, not even a definition of what being a propagandist really means. In the case of Jacques Beau, he was pretty much working out of materials provided by Ukraine.
Yes.
So I mean, well, he's relaying Ukrainian information, and that makes it into Russian propaganda.
Yep.
So we can see it that the whole thing they just don't seem to understand, and they don't know how to read a room because everybody is up to it. It looks so caricatural. They don't even try to maintain, I don't know who said that, but it was an interesting dealing with Venezuela as well. Might have been my friend Patrick Henningsen, who said at least the Bush administration going into Iraq, they pulled all the stops in terms of marketing, messaging, the public opinion, getting all those heavy hitters from the administration and around that to attend the morning cable shows. At the time, remember, there was not as much internet as it was today. So they really worked it out all the way down to the presentation at the UN on February 5th. The curveball, the Office of Special Plan at the Pentagon, Karen Kartowski likely discussed that on your show. They pulled the stops. They had policy shops, making sure they went around official intelligence channel to try to concoct some kind of narrative, even though it was quickly unraveled by the Dulfer report in April 2004.
Right.
But now, as far as Venezuela is concerned, I mean, this whole thing is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, the drug trafficking, the drug cartel makes no sense. We all know that the biggest drug cartel in the world is the U.S. government.
Yes.
Everybody knows that. The work has been done, published. Some people lost their lives over, chronicling such issues. The CIA was running it. Going back to Vietnam with the opium. They made a movie with Denzel Washington about it, American Gangster.
Yep.
So it's so they're just running out of narratives. And even though today with AI and all those technical devices, you could make an argument that it's easier to fool people, but no, because the core narratives that you are recycling, they are used up. You've tried everything in the book, and people are quick to learn. They may get little tidbits here and there on that narrative, or that historical sequence, or that one. But at the end of the day, you still have this collective consciousness. The public opinion, global public opinion, knows that you're full of it,
Yes.
and that
And
it's just,
and it's lazy. It's not even.
Yeah, it's lazy.
There's I don't know if you've ever watched Boss. You might not have seen this. It's an American show that used to come on with Kelsey Grammer. It is Kelsey Grammer's greatest acting tour de force. He is phenomenal in that show. He's a political, he's mayor of Chicago, but he controls effectively Illinois through Chicago. And, there's a scene in that where he's browbeating the mayor. Like he is like digging into the mayor. And he's effectively telling him, you don't have the competence to do bad things well. It's this, right? It's like like you don't have the competence to do bad things well.
Don't insult your audience.
Yeah.
That's right.
And maybe they've come to the assessment that it doesn't matter. It's like, hey, what is anybody going to do about it anyway? Maybe that's the assessment.
Well, that always reminds me of that article in was in October or December 2004 in a New York Times article by Aaron Susskind on, we're an empire now, and while you guys are left to try to ponder and analyze what just happened, we already are forging reality and moving
Yep.
on the next sequence, so that you guys will always be one step behind. Well, there we are. This is it.
But we're not
It's complete.
behind. But that's the rub. I guess
No,
that's
we're
what
not. But
we're
yeah.
not one step behind. Everybody clearly knows he's lying through his teeth. This is dumb.
But this is what the establishment, the man, thinks. They're completely unleashed. They're unmoored from reality. It's they're drunk on power, or the illusion of power, as it were, now, because we're 25 years down the road now, and trillions of dollars have disappeared. De-dollarization is proceeding apace.
Yeah.
There's huge deficits, and so the fundamentals have never looked as shaky as they do now. The country is really coming apart. So I mean, do you really have the means of your pretensions? But this would require introspection. It would require looking into the mirror and calling into question the very nature of what defines you, and they don't want to do that.
We don't.
That's
do
the problem.
Well. Yeah, we don't do that well.
No, because the idea of being reverting to just one country among others, which is minding his own business, it's something that Imperial DC will. I mean, under its current iteration, they'll never get down with this.
Yeah.
It just raises and nobody wants to be, historically speaking, associated with the end of empire. They don't want their names attached to that period. It would probably be the most responsible thing to do among people of good company like you and I, obviously, save blood and treasure, rebuild the American nation, the US. God knows there's so much work to do: infrastructure, education, healthcare, provide a minimum of a threshold for your citizens. Make sure you preserve, what the Constitution provides in terms of civil liberties. I mean, those are, they've been on the back heel going back to 2001 and shortly thereafter. But again, none of those people over there want to have their name associated to this, because they fear the short-term political impact of loss of prestige. And I mean, they don't want telling them that 20 years after those policies were to be implemented, the result will already be visible. I would say even less than 20 years, much less than that. I would say within 5 years, if the course was to be maintained, you would see all the positive feedback. And but no, and that's too much. Right now, nobody wants to do it. They don't want to create coalition to do it, serious coalitions. And the man is defending itself. I mean, entrenched interest, very powerful interest with the financial means to derail any kind of candidacy of people, concerned with those issues, will be derailed and neutralized one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
So this is the state of affair. Unfortunately, we're gonna have to go to the bitter end of it. See it through the bitter end, no matter what it means.
We're the 55-year-old hitting on a 20-year-old at the bar, thinking we still got it. It's like I used to be a jock in high school.
Yeah, yeah, right. Exactly. Yeah. Yes.
Let's move to France. I was fascinated by the story that you told me about, because I didn't know anything about the story. So it's the attempt to destabilize Algeria, and this is going to require, what time is it? Okay, I need to keep you just for about 10 minutes, because this requires.
Yeah, we're good. Yeah.
Algeria, French colony at one point.
More than that, the French department was a department of France, so it was part of France. It was France itself.
Oh.
Algeria was a department. Yeah. A lot of people don't know that. It was not just a mere protectorate like Morocco or Tunisia. No, it was a French department. We call it department, would be like an administrative unit of France, with all the associated, political prerogatives for those locally put in charge by Paris. But yeah,
Up
but go
until the
on.
point
Yes.
they gained their independence. And obviously, France has maintained, let's say, indirect influence on many of these places in Africa that used to be either French colonies or, in the case that you just pointed out, a protectorate. So you pointed out that there was an independence, I guess, a march or rally by an organization called MAK. I'm unfamiliar with this, so I need you to break this down for me. The MAK, this party.
Yeah. Well, as you know, those advocates of regime change tend to always apply the same playbook, which is, you identify the target, you look within that target geographical limits. Where is the leverage? Where you're going to, apply pressure. So
Mhm.
you're looking for, like, if it's the West Asia theater, you're going to be looking for to create fitna, artificial dispute between Sunni and Shia. In cases like Syria and Iraq, you add to this the Kurdish component, the Druze component, the Christian component. Well, in the case of Algeria, there is a province in the west of the country called Kabylie. Lake Kabylie. There are people who were there. They predated at the time when the Umayyad, when Islam, classical Islam, 7th century came and took over the country, as it were. And those people, though, they are Berber, by and large, a lot of them. And for those people in France who were somewhat urged to choose between the suitcase or the coffin, this was what was said in 1962, for those who had been identified as fighting on the side of the colonial occupation. Are you there? Hello?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, okay.
I was giving
Sorry.
you the main screen. That's
Yeah.
all.
Okay.
I was giving you the main screen.
Sorry.
No, you're fine.
So anyway, so it looks like those countries, those individuals, the revanchardists, many of them are, not surprisingly, Algerian Jews who benefited from the decree Crémieux in 1871. They gained French citizenship, whereas their Arabic counterpart didn't. They remain in the indigenous code. So that created the first fracture. And then from between 54 and 62, during the War of Independence, a lot of those Algerian Jews were already penetrated with the Zionist mentality, and they wanted to maintain a certain sense of exclusivity within Algeria. And they chose the side of the occupation, and in so doing, they facilitated a lot of exactions. Well, there was a lot of bad blood, to be sure. And as you know, history saw that the Algerian cause triumphed, and a lot of those people, it was just not viable for them to remain in Algeria after that. So, they would have been tried as traitors. Yes. So a lot of them went to Paris. And for the last 60 years, whether it's them or their kids, they've fed of a lot of resentment, and they want to settle the score with the regime of the generals, right? Who are on any given day being portrayed as a bunch of thieves who basically confiscated the gas and oil rent of the revenues of the country at the expense of
Like
their own
Cuba.
citizens.
Oh, this is like
They
Cuba.
were not able. Yeah, they were provided their independence. We discovered gas for them. We discovered petrol. We discovered the nuclear energy. Was even exploited there. We could have, it's they can't take care of their own country. They're sending us millions upon millions of their disaffected youth. So, in other words, the saying in France is there was a very messy divorce, and France got the kids. And so now it's like France itself, the regime being politically so weak, they are basically easily swayed into espousing, even without their own explicit support. They are being swayed into endorsing tacitly some attempt to destabilize Algeria, because obviously we can see that the MAC is a complete construct like back in Iraq with the all the friends of Syria or the friends of I mean, they made up with all kind of came up with all kind of monikers for those so-called legitimate in exile opposition movements. It's the same thing here. And so since Kabylie is now, you know, which is very unfair and it should be reified, is that among the leadership of the National Liberation Front of Algeria, which to this day governs the country, a lot of them were Kabyle. So it's not like the Arabs from Algiers. You know, a lot of the Kabyle were part of the independence movement at the highest level. And so it would be a complete lie, historical lie, to try to say that they were always somewhat neglected by the central authority, you know. And but so what we saw is the lawyer of this organization, a Mouvement pour Autonome de Kabylie, MAC, as you said. The lawyer for this movement is no less than a guy named Gilles William Goldnadel. He's a very close associate of Netanyahu. He's a member of the French bar, but he's also an Israeli citizen, very close to Likud. And this is the guy that the MAC has chosen to represent their interest. I mean, with friends like this, who needs enemy, right? So, you know, and at the same time, we've had a very coordinated, concerted effort, so-called expression of support for the declaration of independence of Kabylie, coming from places like Canada, coming from places like Tunisia, coming from places like Morocco, when, you know, that makes absolutely no sense, you know. So we can see plain as day that this whole thing is completely artificial. It's been kind of ramped up in a way to try to destabilize the Algerian government and elicit some kind of a reaction within Kabylie, you know. And that has this has had the complete opposite effect, because in Kabylie, no later than yesterday, a lot of Algerians, let's call them Algerians, that's what they are, first and foremost, came out. Algerians from Kabylie came out, traveled to Algiers to participate in a huge rally expressing their allegiance to, you know, the government of Algeria. So we can see that, you know, obviously the normalization between Tel Aviv and Morocco, the context of the Western Sahara situation, they're trying to basically blow on the what should I call it, the ebbs of the fire. You know, they're trying to inflame the situation. We have the situation also bearing on, and that's not really discussed, but, you know, trying to relocate probably at no less than a quarter, if not half a million, if they can get away with it, they'll do it. Palestinians out of Gaza, they want to expulse them, so they got to find places to do so. And one of the places that has been talked about is Libya. But at the same time, you know, they need to create chaotic conditions so that they can get away with transferring that population without anybody noticing. And so creating a conflict where Algeria, which remains the bête noire of the Americans, not only the Americans, the French Zionist circles, is a paramount importance, because it would provide, of course, if successful, the ability to get back into Algeria and exploit this country's resources and remove, you know, an anti-Zionist government, anti-colonial government, non-aligned movement government, but also, again, above and beyond the exploitation for purely economic greed and predation, this ability to, completely reconfigure the demographic makeup of the Maghreb, of North Africa, and getting those Palestinians shipped over to Libya under cover of a conflict between Haftar and the Algerian generals, a lot of simmering tension, and all this will be financed by UAE, because what we are seeing now is an axis between Rabat in Morocco, Tel Aviv, and Abu Dhabi. And this is the same axis, at least for 2 out of the 3, that we see going on in the Red Sea area. The latest expression of this axis being the takeover of Somalia pretty much as a base for the Israelis. They want to build a base there. And the UAE also controls southern Yemen. They control Socotra Island, where the Israelis have a base. And it got so bad the last few days that UAE supported Council on Southern Transitional Council, STC, in Aden, Yemen. I've been going at it against the proxies of the Presidential Council backed by Saudi Arabia in Yemen. So you have the Houthis kind of like looking on the sideline, what's going on, and you've got those two would-be caliph at the sitting in the stead of the caliph, going at it because UAE is, and it's well documented. MBZ has been at loggerhead with NBS for years now, even though MBZ showed MBS around in terms of international relation, both at the regional and international level. But there's been a lot of bad blood between them. Healthy rivalry turned into bad blood, and we see that this is finding its true expression in Yemen. But I digress. So just to say that UAE and the Zionist entity have been working hand in hand for probably 15 years now. And so there is a North African component to it and a West Asia, Red Sea component to it. But Algeria has to go. Algeria it's one of the, when you look at it in the MENA area, Algeria and Iran are the two last remaining obstacles. That's it. One in North in the Mashrek and the other one in Maghreb. Yeah. So,
what are the chances of them being able to destabilize us? As you pointed out, there was a backlash at this kind of shameless attempt in France to go after or to create, let's say, divisions in the country.
Well, I would say that the objective is to try to create animosity between the legal governments of respectively Algeria and Paris. Obviously, like I said, with no less than 7 million registered Algerians living in France, those are Algerian embassy numbers. It makes, in a very difficult economics condition that France is in, it makes for an explosive situation. And so the idea is to create, for both governments who are politically beleaguered, an opportunity to exploit the situation. Paris will say that Algeria is cracking down on its on this right of self-determination of a substantial part of its population, and this creates in turn a mass migration flow that comes into France that France has to handle. And on the other side, Algeria will say that France, as the perennial colonizing power, has never gotten over the loss of Algeria, and the Algerian nation should do anything it can to prevent a return to French neo-colonial, if not outright colonial ambitions, revanchardist, as it were, ambition. So it's a really, really bad situation all around, and obviously we know who is putting some oil on the fire, the same people, same circles, because they stand to benefit from the chaos that would be unleashed if either Paris, Algiers, or both of them lose their composure.
Did I read it right that people were calling for the MK to be banned as a political group?
In Algeria, yes, because they understand it is financed by the enemies of Algeria. So yes, of course, they are considered a terrorist organization. But what's interesting in their declaration of independence is that the event, which was slated to take place last Sunday, initially was supposed to happen around Paris in Les Yvelines. It's a region around Paris, and the prefect, the kind of local official there, decided no, we will not issue the permit for you to gather and do this, because it's tantamount to creating civil unrest. Well, next thing you know, they are doing it within Paris, intramuros, within Paris proper. and the prefect police of Paris somehow, decided it was okay. So it's interesting to see how, there's no continuity. I mean, this is a very burning issue. The last thing that you want as the French government is to allow those kind of provocations, because let's make no mistake about it, it's a provocation to take place on your soil, with the idea, with the perception that you somewhat tacitly endorsed it by not forbidding this event, and that's exactly what happened. So that's really bad. And now the last 3 days, it's almost like the algorithm on X. It's this whole thing is propped up, and it refuses to die. So I don't know where this is going, but I really don't like where this what this is alluding to, and uh, gonna have to keep an eye on this.
Wow. I mean, it is true that France doesn't necessarily like to give up its possessions, or countries that it calls its possessions. I mean, even if you look at Sahel states, there's a widespread belief that the terrorism that is taking place in those states are being derived from France, like destroying their ability to build, going after construction equipment, those type of things that would allow them to effectively rebuild civilization of sorts. So I don't think Algeria is wrong per se, but you don't believe this is coming directly from the French government. You believe that these are kind of this axis of
Not at the
Israel.
official level, no. Although, there probably are tendencies within the French government who are somewhat silently abating this attempt of destabilizing the situation.
Yeah.
But official France at the highest level, no. I don't.
No.
I don't believe that's the case, because they understand. I mean, albeit as incompetent as the Macron administration might be, and ignorant of historical trends, as it were, they still do understand enough about the Algerian dossier that they should refrain from inflaming the situation like this.
Yeah.
So no, I don't believe it's. But the problem is, it's such a the French state is so weak, and there's so much nepotism in who gets to run the country these days, that there's not enough of an influential voice to slam a fist on the table and say enough. So a lot of little camarillas are allowed to percolate and impose insidiously their agenda, and in so doing their concrete endeavors to add the proverbial fuel to the fire. That's the danger when you have a weak state that's basically besieged by a lot of different influential lobbying. With someone like Macron, who has no gravitas on anything, is inconsequential. It does not embody the French state as it should. Those are very dangerous times, and keeping in mind that there's also the Russian, threat narrative being pushed and peddled. So
Right.
a lot of it's a really, really unhealthy and nasty political atmosphere in France right now.
Wow.
Not a good place to be. Yes.
Arnaud, great breakdown. Oh, that's a great breakdown. This was something that I hadn't necessarily seen. I'm glad you brought it to my attention. And also great breakdown on the issue of Ukraine, and also on an act of war on the high seas from the standpoint of the United States. And I can't say I disagree with you.
As far as the Algerian file is concerned, we knew for quite some time that it was just a matter of time before they tried again.
Yeah.
But now that Syria has fallen, and that somehow out of October 7th, the cards have been completely reshuffled in West Asia in a way that does not point out to a final result on either side strategically, but enough that they feel like they can go after Algeria while they're at it. They're going all for nothing right now.
Right. They're going for broke. Trying to go
They're going
after
for broke.
Trying to go after
Yes.
West. So
Yeah. They want to create, they want to emancipate themselves. They realize that with the rise of America first, which is a very, whatever one might think of it, it's a heavy undercurrent people are sick of Zionist influence on the U.S. government. So even in Tel Aviv, they, I mean, we were talking about, the lack of sophistication in trying to impose narrative. Now, I mean, they're coming right out and saying, we're going to destroy your life, on some free speech issue, essentially, right?
Yeah.
So, we'll make sure that, you can't work, no, you can't even get a girlfriend, or it's crazy. I mean, they're not even like, and they're sending out like people associated with the Mia Kahani movement. This organization was declared as a terrorist organization in the US and in Israel in the 1990s. So, but this is who's running the show now. Bunch of fanatics, right? So
Yeah.
they completely lost it. But you're right. They're going for broke. They're going for the whole thing now. Yeah. And they feel like if they can't get what they need to be somewhat self-sustaining, it's going to be more and more complicated in America.
Yeah. Yeah. Arnaud, great breakdown, man. Thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I always appreciate these conversations. I really do. Arnaud Develay, he's an author, political analyst, international lawyer specializing in international criminal law. His book, Foreign Entanglements, Biden, Ukraine, and the Fracturing of America, Political Consensus. Definitely check that book out. And Arnaud, thank you for this. You be safe, okay?
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, man. All right. We have come to the end. We have come to the end. This was not an issue that I knew about. He brought it to my attention and asked if we could talk about it. And I was, of course, like, hell yeah, let's talk about it. So, yeah, we've come to the end. I want to thank all of you for joining me today. I have a lot of work that I need to get done. So I'm going to be doing that tonight. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. You can support this content, PayPal, Patreon, Super Chat, Buy Me a Coffee, memberships, all of these things help support the show. And I'm trying to think, is there anything else? John Helmer is going to be on tomorrow. So he's always a really good guest also. But I will say you all have a fantastic rest of your day or fantastic rest of your night. And I will see you bright and early. Same bat time, same bat channel. Be safe and be kind to the degree that you can be kind. Have a good one all.